I believe the nickels are reaching the last few people. Is that correct? Hang on to those nickels. They're an investment in the future. The nickels are a part of fighter squadron tradition, and at the end of the service, those nickels will be put into grass, tossed into grass, and just hold on to them until the end of the service. Meanwhile, greetings. I personally enjoyed the banquet last night. I hope you did too. To me, that was just an awesome experience. There's a lot of great food, great fun, and a lot of great fellowship going on there. And what more can you ask for? I'm Chaplain Ken Rowley, and I'm the 926 Wing Chaplain, which is the parent organization of the 78th. At least right now, I'm hoping they'll stay with us for quite a while. But I want to thank you for showing up at this memorial service, because indeed, as you know, even more than I do, this is very important that we remember the people that have come before us. I encourage you quickly to look at the person to your left and right and make sure you know who they are. We are family, and if you have not met the people right around you, please take a moment or two and make sure you know who they are. I think that's a key thing. All right, just a couple introductions going on out there, so I think for the most part you already know the people next to you, so we'll move on. Let's begin with a word of prayer. Holy Father, bless this time that has been set aside to remember those who are now written into the history of the 78th Bushmasters. We are thankful for those who have served, their families, their friends, all who help us remember. Be with those who could not attend but wish to be here. Be with those who could not be reached. May they or their families find ways to reconnect with the squadron in the future. Today, as we focus on people who can no longer participate due to their death, we give you thanks. We give you thanks for their contribution to their part of the story of the 78th. Guide us now as we look to the past and remember. Amen. Places, planes, and people. That's been the focus pretty much of this weekend. The 78th, whether followed by the word fighter, tactical, reconnaissance, or attack, or any of the many names that it's been used for, they're still the same squadron. With 100 years of history, there's a lot to remember. There's so many memories out there floating that so many people are trying to grasp. The look on somebody's face at a certain circumstance in their life, the memory of that whatever it is. The memories are out there floating, and we try to capture those. It's difficult to remember all the details of life. But when the memories are collected and they are shared, it becomes a story that can be passed on to others. The concept of a memorial is to honor, commemorate, cause to remember, or preserve the memory of a person, persons, or events. We do not set up memorials to aircraft. We set up displays. The history of the 78th is full of aircraft. You've heard about the Jennies, although I know nobody here flew any. Pea shooters, Hawks, Sabres, and where most of you are more familiar with, Phantoms, Thunderbolts. There are many aircraft associated with the 87th, 78th. Where am I at? These are associated with places: Panama, England, Midway, Hawaii, When you begin to associate the planes with the places, it becomes very interesting, but not really memorable. When you put people into the story, it comes to life, and it has meaning. Planes don't live, places don't live, but people bring life to every circumstance that they encounter. So it's time to remember, it's time to honor, it's time to commemorate people. People have given their lives, their limbs. Some of those flew, some of those repaired, some of those supported. All were part of the 78th Squadron. So I ask, what is the heritage of this squadron? What has been passed down to you from those who served before? These are questions I cannot answer. Only you can determine what you have received. I've heard words such as pride, honor, courage. Do these words resonate in your heart, your mind, your memories? Maybe it's a drive for excellence or a yearning to be part of something great. Let's remember those who are part of the story, but can add no more. For only the living can create the story, only the living can add to the story, only the living can hear the story, and only living can remember the story, and only the living can share that story with others. Let's honor the past and take a look at the heritage.
It was a little emotional when Mark showed me that picture this morning, because I'd never seen that picture of my father. And I think you tell the picture, he was a really good-looking guy. My mother was an absolutely beautiful woman, and there were 4 children born to them, and we absolutely all unquestionably agree that not one of us came out as good-looking as our parents. And it's really true. It's one of those things, they say it skips generations. I'm Scott Saddam. My father, Malcolm Saddam, sometimes known by his middle name Marcin, he said his mother had a strange longing to have lived in France for a while or something. Sometimes called Mac. And he passed away when I was 24, actually on my 24th birthday. And Jerry Yellen, who a lot of you have met, and I had the good fortune to become friends with Jerry. Found him on the internet maybe 15 years ago. We started corresponding. It's funny, I visited his house many times, got to know his wife, passed away, and stayed with him. Took him up in my plane. I have a Commander 114, which he just loved, and he could still fly as if he got into, just left his Mustang the day before. I learned a lot from Jerry, and he told me a lot. But one of the things he could describe incredibly was at that time in World War II, that he said, if you take a bunch of the very best young men you could find, and then take the best of those, and then take the best of those and the best of those, and then pick one out of that, you'd have a guy who was a P-51 pilot in World War II. So I did a little research on the internet, and it's kind of hard to sort out the numbers, but this is what I came up with. That out of every 1,100 young men that entered flight training in World War II, one got to the level of the P-51 fighter pilot. You think if you take And these were fellows already in the Army, so they passed that physical test. Line 1,100 up and down the street here. 1,100 of them. And one got to that. And Jerry said that's how good they were. My dad had 20/12 vision. He could hear things that nobody else could hear. He was a phenomenal athlete. I didn't inherit any of those things from him. Seriously. I had hearing aids. I had 14 eye surgery. But I love to fly. And I fly pretty much every week. I've amassed about 4,000 hours now, and it's very deep in me from the time I was a small child. But realizing that who those young men were and what they did, the age they did. But a lot of you know, and a lot of you probably experienced this yourselves in later years, that my father was someone who in many ways never got over the war. And I do remember as a young child the nights he woke up and woke the family up, crying out. And he would talk about flying over the beaches of dead Marines on Iwo. And he volunteered in field hospital, and once when they had to go out and be on boats or evacuated, I think the boats were all, he volunteered to be in the hospital on the ship. And because he just wanted to be doing something. Jerry Yellen talks about how transcendental meditation saved his life. That was his way of dealing with it. My dad took up writing in his 40s and became quite accomplished and recognized for that. And he published 2 books of poetry here. About a third to maybe half of each one are about his war experiences. And a play he wrote called The 20th Mission that has some importance, that number. And we were all excited about this. The story was that Paul Newman had read it and liked it, and they were talking about doing a play and a movie and all this excitement. And then my father got a very, very aggressive cancer and went from a picture of health to deceased within 6 months. Totally unexpected. So that dream of that died with that. And when Jerry took up writing closer to his really 70s and 80s before he started writing, in some ways I felt he took up my father's mantle and began writing. If you haven't read Jerry's books, I highly recommend it. So rather than me tell you about my dad, I thought I'd let him speak for himself. So I would like to have read about 20 of these to you. But I'm going to pick just a few and read you to give you a sense of not simply who he was, but what the war meant in those times and the impact it had on people. The play, if you open it up, it says, it was dedicated to memory of First Lieutenants Gordon Christo and Wallace Keith Wayland, fellow pilots that he flew with. And some of the poems are quite short. There's a couple that I'd love to read, for the sake of time I won't, but one especially called Casualties that goes on for about 3 to 4 pages, and you can't read it without deeply feeling what happened in the war. It's about his experience volunteering at the field hospital when he wasn't flying. But I thought I'd just give you a quick sense of this. This is called No Greater Love Hath for Keith Wayland, who was one of his closest friends. Flying toward the strange white night, we thought of deliverance from the terror of choice, to difference, to splendor of our scheme. We could not sleep and refuse tomorrow's voice. Compelled, we thrust the unknown with outstretched wings. A naked bond between, and then a distant light. When we had come alive, a flame burst over the harsh beauty of the sea, and Keith was gone. Gordon Christo. I remember his confident voice, his high-flying banter, the sound of his chattering guns, the echo of his laughter. Then the samurai came and shouted his name, and Gordon disappeared in a black whisper. Now, just so I can get through this, I thought my dad had a great sense of humor too. And he loved telling a story, and it's probably a story that there's probably a couple thousand guys who have the same story, different versions of it, and maybe it happened to one of them, my father was the first one who spread it, who knows. But to break it up, this has a little bit of a humor side to it. It's called Faces. A funny thing happened in the war, and you'll never believe it, but there was this Jap Zero at 10 o'clock low. So I rolled up in a bank and hauled back on the stick too fast, nearly lost control. And when I rolled out again, there was this other Jap, he must have been the wingman, flying formation with me. We flew that way for hours, well, at least 4 seconds, having nothing else to do but stare each other down, and then, as if by signal, we both turned hard away and hauled ass out of there. We flew that way for hours, at least 4 seconds. And when I looked again, he was gone, but I can still see that oriental face right now. Somewhere in Tokyo, standing in a bar, there's this guy who's saying, a funny thing happened in the war, and you'll never believe it, but there was this American. Okay, so I'm going to do 2 more here. This one, Odd Man Out. And talking to a fellow earlier saying about how much he loved doing the strafing runs. It's what he loved. Really neat guy I met. He was a A-10 pilot. That was what I had hoped to fly, and they told me my eyes weren't good enough to fly jets, so I didn't join. Odd Man Out. When I think of the whims of capricious gods, or should I give myself credit for being in the right place at the right time, as time went on, we gained a confident superiority, taking the initiative in search and destroy missions designed by the brass to keep pressure on the targets of opportunity. The day we found one hiding in the trees, an armored train, innocent in camouflage until we saw the telltale blinking lights. We fell upon it in crescendos of sound, submerged in the waves of flat, joyously surfacing again and again, reminiscent of our boyhood game. The danger seemed contrived, unreal. 3 passes, and nothing happened. Nothing. We circled out, reformed again, and headed for the sea when someone called, Green 4's missing. Where is he? Phil. Who saw him go down? No one. We searched the near perimeter. The land lay soft and sullen, contradictory to war. No wreckage or conspicuous fires, a clear horizon, nothing. We left him there, somewhere. Tomorrow's fate confirmed that there was nothing we could do to save him, to acclaim him, to mark his name, to say that he was ever there. Nothing to sustain his mother, who would later cry in her anguish that he was made a sacrificial lamb. No one to explain how souls disappear in death's shadows. Phil Steinberg, last casualty. Last man in the strafing run. So I'm going to conclude with one called Blue Angels. My father read this at a memorial service of a pilot. The next year, he read it at the memorial service for his father. The following year, I read this in 1976 for the memorial service of my father. I read it a few times over the years in memorial services, and probably the most noteworthy was, if you remember, when the Thunderbirds crashed. The left wing was Captain Mark Mellon's son, a good friend of mine. We were fraternity brothers. I helped him plan his first cross country. All he ever wanted to be was Air Force. And I was so excited with him and everyone else when he made Thunderbirds. And I read this at a memorial service for Mark. And I would have loved to have, if fate hadn't intervened, read it at one for Jerry Yellen. So I'll read this for all of us, I guess. Stuff kind of adds up, after time. And I will rise on wings of splendid fire and trace 1,000 love poems for their desire. And I will climb through towers of timeless space and lift my ardent longing to the sun's embrace. And I will soar across the endless skies and seek the precious moment where the deep heart lies, and I will glide down halls of velvet white and spread the morning with a God's delight. Love will I bring to you, life will I sing to you, beauty becoming you, faith to ascend. You look at me amazed, I will begin again. Thank you.
Chaplain, thank you for those kind words. Appreciate that. Where destiny is not preordained for one must create their own destiny, and in the process, share their lives. And looking at Jim Vandehey, or Van as he was affectionately known throughout his life, he was my father. Sometimes he probably wished he wasn't. I would say he created his own destiny. He was the third of 9 children. When his father died, my dad was at the age of 12, leaving his mother to raise 9 and still maintain the farm. At 18, thanks to a mentor, he stayed in school, finished high school, and was the first to graduate in the family. And soon left after that, working in Wisconsin, either driving a logging truck, working for the CCCs, or pursuing his passion in sports, golf, as a caddy. War was imminent. I recall in the story, I think he said they were at a bar, and he and his brother and 2 friends decided to join up. I can only speculate why my father had his reasons. But I do know, he said, the last thing I want to do is spend another winter in Wisconsin on the farm. So he enlisted in the Army, was classified as a vehicle mechanic, went to Chanute for training. And while there, they were recruiting for aviation cadets. Now, why did he want to be an aviation cadet? Well, according to him, it wasn't for a love of flying, for, like many, he'd never seen an airplane. I'm sure there was a sense of patriotism to serve his country, but he never said that to me. What he saw, being the practical man he was that I'm making $15 a month as a vehicle mechanic, and I can make $75 a month as a flyer. He applied, was accepted, and so the rest of the story. I tell this bit of Jim Vandehey's past because it, like many of us who learn from our past experiences and how we deal with things, it was a reflection of who I think he was. And more importantly, an example of so many during that era. There was John Lambert wrote the book, The Long Campaign. And in there he says, prior to their Air Cadet experience, most of these Depression-era boys had never strayed beyond the borders of their native states. In those days, a trip from a Midwest farm to Des Moines or Omaha, or a move from a West Texas ranch to college in Fort Worth was a historic journey. When these same boys were awarded their silver wings and gold bars at Kelly Field, it was indeed heady stuff. The assignment to Hawaii and the trip from San Francisco to Honolulu on a Matson steamship was like a voyage to another planet. And in talking to Mr. and Uh, Ed, I never can pronounce your last name right. McClavick. Mr. McClavick was an armor with the 78th. And I asked him what he did before he enlisted. And he said he was worked at a bakery, he worked at a bank, he did everything but deal with munitions. And that was a characterization of that generation and what those great heroes stepped into with no experience and no visibility of what life was, military life. So what came out of all this for Jim Vandehey as a person? Well, he wasn't unique. Like many of those of that generation, he was a survivor. His decisions he made not on behalf of anyone else, but for his own self-being. He loved those throughout his life, and I learned later that one of the other reasons he wanted that $75 a month paycheck was to be able to send money home to his mother, because she still had 8 other children to raise. In making his own decisions, he gambled with what he had. At Hickam, he won his first car in a poker match. I recall a story he told me on the flip of a coin. I recall the story he told. He got called into the CO's office. I don't recall who the CO was. He and another pilot, and said, "I've got to send somebody down to New Guinea. You guys sort it out." Well, both of them wanted to stay in Hawaii with the 72nd at the time. 72nd or 3rd, Mark? I think he was with the 73rd. So he agreed on the flip of a coin that whoever lost would have to go to New Guinea. He won. Fortunately for him, he won. He had the confidence in doing that. And even later in his life, as bad a putter as he was, he could take a 10-foot putt, look at somebody like Cantwell in the eye, and say, "I'm going to make this putt," and he sure as hell would make the putt when he needed to. That's the confidence he had, and I think he always demonstrated that as a officer and as a leader. More importantly, during his time, he always valued and meticulously weighed heavily the risk on his decisions and their impact on others. And he always took into consideration their well-being. I asked Ed what were some words he had about Dad when he was over there. And he said, "I remember your dad was one of the strictest disciplinarians, but he had a big heart in doing it because he cared about his people." I remember a story he told me, and it's in the book. They were coming back from, had to turn back from Macon, back from Millie, back to Macon, and like the 51s that hit the weather, they hit weather there. Tried to go above it, tried to go under it, and couldn't break through the clouds. And he started getting calls from the other pilots. They were getting low on fuel. Well, he could have pressed on, and as he said, and I quote him, he said, "We put out our lights and called for a heading. I'd fly on the water until the rain was so heavy I couldn't see the surface. Then I'd pull up and try to fly simulated instruments at about 300 feet with all the formations stacked tightly about me. As we got nearer the base, still in the soup and uncertain of our location, the other planes began to call me. 'Captain Van, I'm down to 20 gallons. My fuel warning light has come on.' I was contemplating a mass bailout, wondering how I could get the squadron in a circle so we could jump and come down together. I was also praying like mad and sweating like hell." One of the few times he ever told me that he actually had prayed. I know he had, but he never admitted that because he figured, I'm in control. Well, the Lord was listening. I looked up through the clouds, and there was a blue sky. So he was willing to put everybody together, keep them together to maximize minimize the risk of the loss of one pilot. I think he valued the worth of others, their work, their commitment, well over their background. I recall stories he would tell where, regardless of whether you were enlisted or officer at EWO, when it came time to patch things up and get things done, everybody took care of it. There was no differentiation in rank, background, just ability and effort. When he was a commander later in life, I think having directly experienced the loss of so many junior pilots in the years in the Pacific, he always gave a degree of latitude to those young officers and enlisted who made mistakes either due to immaturity or carelessness, as long as those mistakes did not cause harm to others. I remember when he was the base commander at Ramstein, he got a call from the club and one of the captains had drank too much. Fortunately, he had a wingman, but the guy got out of hand. Cops called my dad. He put the major on the phone and he said, "You have Captain Smith down in my office at 0600 the next morning. If he's not there, he'll wish he had been." And the captain showed up, and rather than chew him up and down the wall, recognizing that this young man had made his mistake, he had a career worth saving, he cut him some slack and said, "Take this as a first strike, press on and continue to do their job." When he was attack DP, I remember him telling me about a staff sergeant that said, came in, my dad handed him a bunch of papers, and he said, "Here, burn these." Staff sergeant left. In fact, some of you may know him as Chief George Baker, who was a PACAF DPO. Came back and came empty-handed. My dad said, "Well, what did you do with the papers?" He said, "Well, sir, you said burn them, and I burned them." My dad just shrugged his hands. He said, "Well, you know, son, I did tell you that." And then Ed was telling the story, Major Van got really upset at Ed and threatened to bust him to private because the guys were shooting the guns on the ground, and he told them, "That happens one more time, I'm busting you to private." And in the middle of that sentence, the guns went off. And my dad just looked at Ed and said, "Never mind," walked away. The things that I mentioned as far as being a disciplinarian, having a big heart, that's how he raised his three boys. Never yelled, always had a very calm demeanor, never lost his temper. His bark was definitely worse than his bite. His bark was simply pulling his belt out halfway and saying, "Do I need to use this?" And that was about the end of it. And I think, again, that's a product of his experiences back in the war. Something that Scott said, and I gathered in learning about Jerry Ellen, my dad said that if he knew everything would stay the same and he came out the way he did, he would do it all over again. But the difference between him and Captain Yellen and Scott's dad, he was a veteran combat pilot, and he had gone through the experiences that these young men had not yet faced in a war that they were in. And while the outcomes of things affect people differently, I would say that perhaps if he had seen more of that, who knows what the difference would have been. But fortunately for the squadron and for us as children, he didn't, and we were fortunate to have him. He was pretty stoic in things. He never got excited about things, but I will say this. Whenever he saw the likes of Tim Cantwell in the reunions, his blue eyes would light up, and that was the one time that excitement filled him, because regardless of whether you were a snake in 70 with the 78th in World War II, an A-10 driver, a Viper driver, any of the aircraft, it was a brotherhood of pilots that he cherished, young and old, and more especially, it was a brotherhood of the 78th. And as he would say if he were here, once a snake, always a snake.
Robert Roseberry passed away March 17, 2015. He flew P-51s with the Bushmasters from Iwo Jima, and as a result was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. After the war, he became an attorney and practiced law for 30 years. He enjoyed hunting, fishing, and wood carving, and wrote a column for his local newspaper for many years called Far Afield with Bob Roseberry. Once a snake, always a snake.
A.R. Gibson passed away this last year. And I was looking through his journal, and this one particular story I think stands out for anyone who was ready to take a check ride. So in primary, we had a flight check every 20 hours. We called it a washing machine, because if you didn't pass, you were washed out. Not quite. You got a second chance to redeem yourself. My first check ride was a disaster. I was a basket case, a bundle of nerves, scared to death, and flunked it. I couldn't do anything right. My instructor asked me what had happened. He said I was way ahead of his other students, as I should, because I had previous time with CPT. He said, okay, now you get another ride with the headman. Now do it right, as I know you can. The headman was a real nice guy. He told me he wasn't here to wash me out, but to help me get through it. Now let's go up and work it out. Well, I did fine. When we came back, I gave him a textbook landing. He shook my hand and said, that was a good ride. You shouldn't have any problems getting your wings. I never failed another check ride. Once a snake. Always a snake.
This memory of A.J. Bassinger was sent in by his daughter, Shelby Bowie. Dad was a very caring man, very great role model for his kids and grandkids and his whole family. He and his wife, Wanda, were married for 63 years. He was known to everyone as Grandpa because he drove the school bus for many years, and that is how the kids knew him. Once a snake, always a snake.
Mike Swearigan was my friend. Mike Swearigan was my friend. I first met him in September 1969 when I was assigned to the 78th at Woodbridge. He was a crew chief, I was a weapons. We never worked out of the same shop. We met at barracks and became friends. He was a musician, a technophile. He liked anything that you made with your hands. He was a bit odd, you can tell by his glasses. He thought he was a pilot, which a lot of crew chiefs thought they were pilots. I said, if you were a really great crew chief, you would have never fallen off the wing of your plane and hurt your leg. But we lost contact around that in 1972. We kept in contact by phone over the years. I know he was stationed here at Nellis. I don't know what years when F-111s were here. And he didn't like the 111s compared to the F-4s. He was always an F-4 fan. And the funniest story I can tell is we went camping in Rendlesham Forest one night, actually one weekend, and we didn't see any UFOs, but the Bobby popped up out of nowhere, asking us what we were doing out there. And he said, "We're just camping, man." Yeah. Anyway, like I say, I never saw him again for almost 30 years. And then I heard about the reunion here in Las Vegas for our snakes. I don't remember what year it was. I called him on the phone and I said, "Mike, let's meet in Las Vegas. You drive from Albuquerque and I'll drive to California." So we did, and we met each other in the parking lot. It was just like we'd never been apart. We were close friends. And I was sorry to hear he passed because we had taken a lot of trips together. And we were planning a couple more. But once a snake,
Well, it's daunting to speak about a man like Jerry Yellen, such a giant of a man. I met him in May of 2014. I was Lieutenant Colonel Dave Scoop Edwards, and I was the commander of the 78th at the time. I went back to Colonel Tapp's interment in Arlington National Cemetery, and there was this spry elderly man in a leather jacket with a Bushmaster patch the size of a salad plate. And I went over to him and said, "Who are you?" He said, "I'm Captain Jerry Yellen. Who are you?" I said, "Well, I'm the commander of the 78th. It's nice to meet you." And so I told him about the Bushmasters, and I said, "Jerry, I would love for you to come out and see us during our September drill weekend." And he said, "I'd be happy to do that." And so that's the intersection, the introduction of Jerry to today's Bushmasters. For those of you who know Jerry, this won't surprise you, but during that waiting period from that short introduction to the time he came to see us, I didn't know very much about him, but I knew that he had fire and he was feisty. And so one morning, Saturday morning, once again, I'm just lowly Lieutenant Colonel Edwards, and I checked my BlackBerry and checked for email, and there's this email, and it's from Jerry Yellen to Mark A. Welsh, General, USAF, CC, Lieutenant Colonel Edwards. It says, "Greetings, Mark. I hope you and your family, small and large, are well. Trying times, I know. On May 30th, Jim Tapp, my CO of the 78th, was buried in a memorable ceremony at Arlington. Lieutenant Colonel David Edwards, the current CO of the Bushmasters, was there too. I have been invited to spend September 4th to 7th with them in Nevada. Really thrilled about that. Any chance you will be in the neighborhood?" So Jerry invited the Chief of Staff to our drill. All the best, Jerry. Well, I thought, okay, he is a busy guy, General Welsh. Maybe some of you were squadron mates with him, but to me, he's the chief. So I thought, well, for sure, he's too busy to reply. But this is what came the next day, Sunday, from Welsh, Mark A. the 3rd General, to Jerry Yellen, CC Edwards. "Wish I could be, sir. I will be out there next week visiting Red Flag. Can't wait to see our young airmen in action. I'm sorry to hear about your former CO. I'm glad Lieutenant Colonel Edwards could be there. Take care of yourself. Regards, Mark." So I don't know how many people here get CC'd on emails like that from the chief, but it says something to how special Jerry is and how bold, really. His visit to Creech that fall was really one of the highlights of my command tour. He remained my friend. He spent the night at my house a couple of times. He spoke at my kids' schools. He asked my daughter if he could be the honorary grandfather, and she said yes. Pretty wise move, I think. He's a special guy. Jerry's told us the story of his life and career through his books and speeches, and I urge you to listen to some of those speeches if you haven't by now. He's an incredible guy. So I thought I'd just talk about a couple of things, lessons that I learned through our time together. First, Jerry showed me how to be bold and courageous. We did a wreath-laying ceremony together during that weekend, and there's a video of that Hercules can share with you too. And he empowered me. I felt like legions of Bushmasters were standing with us as he stood by my side, World War II to RPAs, and it was incredible. I've never felt anything like it before or since. He was fearless in his outspoken advocacy for veterans of the greatest generation and for veterans of all generations with PTSD. Incredible. He stood strong in support of duty, honor, and his passionate belief in the attainability of world peace. He never let up on that. It was mission all the way to the end. The second lesson Jerry taught us was about loyalty, specifically the loyalty that brings us together here this weekend. And to be honest, until that weekend, that May 30th, when I went back to Arlington, I'd not really given much thought to the lineage of the Bushmasters, the history, short of what directly affected me. But talking to Jerry, Bushmaster history to me was just clusters of men and machines at different periods of time, and I didn't see how they connected. But Jerry showed me that there's really a bright gold thread that ties us all together across those years. It's loyalty. It's to your country. It's to your squadron. It's to your sisters and brothers in arms and to your family. He was very loyal to his family. If you heard him talk about his children and his wife, it's very moving. That's what makes me so proud to be here with you all this weekend. It's really special. Lastly, Jerry taught me about fellowship. He had an uncountable number of friends, and this is not just because he had more than 8 decades to accumulate them. It's because he had the ability to reach out and recognize human dignity in everybody and reach us in that place where we're all equal. It's I think for those of you who knew him, even just a little bit, probably know what I'm talking about. This is how he made everybody feel special. I will miss receiving texts and emails and calls from him. And there are currently no other 90-year-olds in my phone contact list. So Jerry died, as the saying goes, with his boots on, his flying boots. Within the last year, he flew the T-6 Texan with the Air Force. He, I think it was Veterans Day weekend, he flew a Stearman biplane. And when I talked to him just a few days before he died, he was trying his best to get better so he could go fly an F-16. He had an F-16 ride lined up in December. And I believed he could do it. If anybody could, he could. I deeply admire the way Captain Jerry Yellen lived his life. He pinned his ejection seat. He pushed the throttle to the firewall. He took off, and by God, he was not landing until the last drop of fuel was used. May we all be so lucky as to go the same way. Wants a snake? Always a snake.
Harold May. He served in the 78th during World War II, was at Wheeler during the Pearl Harbor attack. He served for 30 years in the Air Force and passed away on November 18th, 2011. Once a snake?
Always a snake.
Tim Britt, Bubba Britt. There was a picture of snakes in, I guess it's in a bar. It's a good place for him to be. He's kind of looking over his shoulder, so now we didn't obviously have a chance to do this, kind of brought up. Tim Britt, Georgia Tech grad, always wanted to be a pilot, didn't have the didn't actually have the medical for it when he came out of ROTC. So he got to go be an engineer in Tennessee, and then got chosen to go to pilot training. His father, which he'll tell you, was the PACAF Gunsmoke winner and was the original first squadron commander for the F-15s there at Langley. So he wanted to follow his father's footsteps. Of course, out of pilot training, he gets the mighty Warthog. Gets to come to Bentwaters, pretty big chip on his shoulder, and one of the nicest guys and one of the funnest guys to hang out with for my 2.5 years. He lived right next door to me. Somehow or another, he got the big house with 3 bedrooms and 2 Rottweilers, and I got the little house with 2 bedrooms, basically in a walk-in closet with a kid and my wife. So, you know how that happened. But we turned one of the rooms into a dart room and made our way through life. I left there and stayed in touch with Bubba. Even when I got out of the Air Force, he called me to let me know how things were going. And we got this F-15 finally. I was unable to maintain it for very long. He showed up from one party with half his head shaved, and the squadron commander did not take, it was Eglin, and the squadron commander did not take that very lightly and sent him to Camp Red Cloud. Bubba thinks that I can get out and go fly for Delta. His medical problem shows up again during their medical, and he begs his way back to go to Camp Red Cloud so he could stay in the Air Force. And he did, and he came back and AT-38 Squadron Commander at Columbus, and one night he went to sleep and did not wake up. He was 42 years old. Once a snake, always a snake.
I'd like to take a moment to remember a good friend of mine, Captain Craig C.O. Cialetti, and tell you what a great man he was. But first I got to tell you what a moving event it is for me, because 35 years ago I was asked by his widow to give the eulogy at his memorial. And I cried so much in front of the crowd, I don't think anybody heard anything good about CO. So now, 35 years later, I get a chance to say something good about it, where people can hear it. I hope I don't start crying. But anyway, met CO when we were in the A-10s together in the 1980 time frame in Myrtle Beach. And what I can say about him is he was everything I couldn't be. He was good looking, he was smart, he was just the most awesome husband and father and that I've ever known. He just made me feel pretty small every time I was around him. One day, the squadron commander asked, or was telling me that I was going to be his pick to go to weapons school, and I quickly talked him out of it because I knew I was not smart enough to go through weapons school. And so he said, well, then you got to have somebody else that you recommend. This happened to me twice. Tom Pop filled the square for one of the times, but the first time it was CO. So I go back to the weapons shop where he worked and said, CO, you're going to weapons school. And you would have thought he saw a ghost. He said, I can't do that. I said, why? I'm not smart enough. I said, you're twice as smart as I am. You're going to go. And not only did he go, those of you at Woodbridge who got to know CO, you knew that he was not just smart, he was a tactician. All those assets and traits that I mentioned earlier, plus just a fantastic warrior and A-10 pilot, and still missing a lot today. Once a snake, always a snake.
I want to echo what the senator said. What a great gathering this is, and thank you all for putting this on. I think I'm the last speaker, so in conclusion, one of the themes that has come through from last night to today is excellence, and I'm here to remember 2 squadron commanders. The first one, Colonel Al Mud Moore. He is an absolute legend, legendary A-10 pilot. His history, I could spend 10 minutes here telling you all the things that Mud is famous for on his resume.
Vietnam War, got shot down twice. OA-37s, A-7s. Right here at Nellis Air Force Base, he ran the A-10 Fighter Weapons School section. Absolutely legendary tactician. He comes over to the A-10 world, and guess what? I'm a lieutenant in the squadron, and we're getting a new squadron commander, and guess who it's going to be? Mud Moore. All of us are so excited because and a little bit scared because we know his reputation, right? His reputation is excellence, and that's what he's expecting from all of us, right? He came over to the 78th, and I think we had 19 gunnery competitions during his 2 years. 78th, we won 18 of them, right? He was awesome. He loved everybody in that squadron. Raise your hand if you don't know what the LPA is. LPA, okay. Lieutenant Protection Association, right? Within a fighter squadron, you got the LPA. It's all the lieutenants. The lieutenants all band together. We had no problem. There's no rank, right? In the LPA, you go to MUD. Hey, we got a problem with this. We got a problem with that. He empowered us lieutenants in that squadron. Let us become flight leads early, 4-ship flight leads. When we upgraded to instructor, he went out a lot of times and gave the check ride, and he absolutely made it tough for us. So when we became 4-ship flight leads and instructors, and he was the commander of this weapons school, that was a big thing when we passed that. So Mud went on to become the full-bird colonel, vice wing commander up at Eielson, F-16 unit. And he was tragically killed after he retired in a light airplane accident. So that's the first one. Once a snake. Yeah. And also the annual Hog Smoke Trophy is named after Mud Moore. The top team of the A-10 gunnery competition was named after Mud. His wife Trang is still here in the Las Vegas area. And his son Jim, who was born when we were there, is a captain in the Air Force. So that's Mud. Second one, hard act to follow, Mud Moore, the king of the A-10 attack tactics division, was Vic White, V-Dub. Tough act to follow. He came in and he did it. Vic was more of a people person than Mud. He really, really cared about how your job was going. He cared about your family. He really took care of us. A couple how do I say this? Captains were captains at times and did things that might have got him Article 15s. And V-Dub kept a desk drawer. His top desk drawer had, I know, at least 2 or 3 Article 15s in it. And he'd say to us, look, if you do that again, I'm going to process these, right? He didn't process them. He kept them, and we kept our nose clean, and he's just a lovable, huggable teddy bear of a squadron commander. He was awesome. Once a snake? Always a snake. Thank you.
Are there any others? These are the stories. The story goes on. We've heard of the past. We're living in the present. We're finding out about what the 78th is doing now. What's the future hold? What story is yet to be written? Get your nickel ready. In just a few moments, we're going to go out that door, and there'll be amazingly, a patch of grass will appear, and you will have opportunity to put that nickel in the grass. Meanwhile, I invite you to stand, and let's close with a word of prayer. Holy Father, may the story of the Bushmasters be remembered, not because of the aircraft, not because of the location, but because of those who have served. Help us to remember. Help us to tell the story. We honor the past, but the story does continue. Be with our active force, serving our nation as the 78th Attack Squadron. May these men and women serve with honor, continuing to write the story of loyalty, bravery, sacrifice, honor, pride, excellence, and whatever else may be part of that heritage that they've received. May the legacy of lethality deter war, stop aggression, and lead to peace. As we look to the future, we see waves of threats rolling on the horizon. May the 78th continue to meet the challenges and aggressively defeat those who threaten. May their legacy continue, building with each generation. This I pray in your most holy name. Amen.